Step away from the heir, servant, or every wolf in this palace will know your name before sunrise." Commander Garrett Stone's voice struck the narrow laundry hall like a slammed iron gate, and Emma Whitaker froze with both hands still dripping soapy water onto the stone floor. Behind her, hidden in the folds of her faded gray work dress, the Alpha King's missing pup trembled so hard she could feel each small shiver through the cloth. Less than 1 hour ago, every bell in Blackthorn Palace had been ringing over the snow-covered hills of northern Montana, warning the royal court that 5-year-old Leo Blackthorn, the only son of Alpha King Adrian, had vanished from the protected wing. Now the heir was here, barefoot, silent, and clinging to a servant girl no one had ever bothered to look at twice. 12 royal warriors filled the doorway, their dark uniforms dusted with frost, their eyes fixed not on the child, but on Emma, as if a girl with soap on her sleeves and a laundry basket at her feet could somehow be the most dangerous thing in the palace. Emma's throat tightened. Her pulse beat so loudly she was certain they could hear it. She was 21, low-ranked, underfed, and employed to scrub wine from table linens after noble families finished laughing over them. She had never spoken to a commander unless ordered. She had never stood in the same room as royal blood. And she had definitely never been accused by armed warriors while the Alpha King's child hid behind her knees. "I didn't take him," she said, though her voice came out softer than she wanted. Leo's fingers tightened in her skirt. A tiny sound escaped him, not a growl, not quite a sob, but something broken in between, and every warrior stiffened as if the air itself had changed. Garrett took one step forward. The boy flinched so violently that Emma moved without thinking. She shifted her body between him and the commander, small as that protection was, and lifted one damp hand, palm open. "Please," she whispered, not to the warriors, but to the child. "It's okay, little wolf. Breathe with me. Just breathe." Silence dropped over the hall. Somewhere above them, the palace bell stopped ringing, leaving only the hiss of winter wind against the high windows and the soft drip of water from Emma's sleeves. Leo pressed his forehead into the back of her dress, and the sharp, frightened tension in the room seemed to bend around her voice. Garrett's expression hardened. "Move aside." Emma looked at the warriors, at the polished boots, the royal insignias, the cold certainty on every face. She should have stepped away. A servant survived by obeying. A servant survived by becoming invisible. But the little boy behind her was shaking like a leaf caught in a storm, and every instinct in her body understood one terrible truth. He had not run to safety. He had run from something. Emma swallowed the fear burning in her throat and took half a step back, covering Leo more completely. "No," she said, barely above a whisper. The word was so small it should have disappeared. Instead, it carried. Garrett's eyes narrowed. The warriors shifted. Then Leo lifted his face from her skirt, his golden eyes wet and wild, and looked past Emma at the commander. A low warning rumbled from his tiny chest, but when Emma touched his hair, he quieted instantly. Every man in the corridor saw it. The untouchable royal pup, missing for hours, terrified of trained guards, calmed by the hand of a laundry servant. Garrett reached for the radio at his shoulder. "Inform the king," he said, his voice suddenly careful. "We found the heir." Emma's heart stumbled. Leo made a small panicked sound and buried himself behind her again. Down the far end of the hall, the air turned heavy with pine, frost, and royal power. One by one, the warriors lowered their eyes. A tall shadow appeared beneath the archway, still and absolute. Alpha King Adrian Blackthorn had arrived, and his gaze went first to his son, then to the trembling servant girl standing between the heir and the entire royal guard. 3 hours earlier, Emma Whitaker had been invisible enough to be blamed for everything and important enough to be punished for it. The trouble began in the banquet hall, where the royal guests glittered beneath chandeliers made of crystal and antler bone, and Emma stood among the servants with a tray of warm cider, balanced carefully in both hands. Lady Vanessa Crowe had stepped backward without looking, her silk gown sweeping across Emma's path like a pale blue wave. The tray tipped. One silver cup rolled across the polished floor, spilling cider near the hem of Vanessa's dress. The music stopped before the cup did. Every noble face turned. Vanessa looked down at the small stain as if Emma had set fire to the palace. "Clumsy little thing," she said, her voice sweet enough to make the insult worse. Are the kitchens hiring strays now? Heat climbed Emma's face. She lowered her eyes because servants survived by lowering their eyes. I am sorry, my lady. Sorry does not clean royal floors. The head housekeeper grabbed Emma by the elbow and marched her from the hall, while soft laughter followed like snow slipping from a roof before an avalanche. Minutes later, Emma was behind the palace near the old laundry yard, kneeling beside a stone basin filled with icy water, scrubbing table linens until her fingers burned from the cold. The northern Montana night pressed against the palace walls, dark and sharp, and the servant quarters sat far from the warm windows where nobles danced and decided the future of packs they would never have to serve. Emma pulled her thin shawl tighter and kept working. She told herself not to cry. Crying wasted warmth. Then she heard it. A small scrape came from the abandoned carriage shed beyond the laundry yard. Emma stilled. The sound came again, soft, uneven, followed by a breath that shook like paper in the wind. She should have called a guard. That was the rule. Servants did not investigate palace grounds alone, especially not on a night when royal warriors had been searching since sundown. But something about that sound touched a place in her chest that rules had never managed to reach. Emma rose slowly, taking the lantern from the hook beside the basin. Hello, she whispered. The shed smelled of hay, old leather, and winter damp. In the farthest corner, beneath a cracked wooden bench, two golden eyes flashed in the lantern light. Emma almost dropped it. A little boy crouched there in torn sleep clothes, his dark hair tangled, his bare feet muddy, one ankle wrapped in a strip of silver-gray wire from some broken trap or fence. His eyes were not fully human. They were bright, frightened, and too old for a child. He bared tiny teeth when she stepped closer. Emma stopped at once and lowered herself to the ground several feet away. All right, she breathed. I will stay here. The boy watched her as if every adult in the world had already failed him. Snow whispered against the shed roof. From far away, a horn called through the palace grounds, and the child flinched so hard his shoulder struck the wall. Emma set the lantern down and unpinned the cleanest strip of cloth from her apron. I am not going to hand you to anyone who scares you, she said, keeping her voice soft and even. But that wire is hurting you, and I think you know it. He did not answer. He only trembled. Emma slid the cloth across the floor instead of reaching for him. You can use this, or I can help. Your choice. The boy stared at the cloth, then at her hands, raw and red from the laundry water. At last, with the smallest movement, he pushed his injured ankle forward. Emma moved slowly, narrating each motion in a whisper, as if gentleness could build a bridge stone by stone. When the wire came loose, the boy made a broken sound and grabbed her sleeve. Not to attack, to hold on. Emma wrapped the cloth around his ankle, then took half a roll from her apron pocket, the dinner she had saved for after work. She broke it in two and offered him the larger piece. He sniffed it, suspicious and starving, then took one bite. After a moment, he pushed the smaller half back toward her. The gesture nearly undid her. Thank you, Emma whispered. That is very kind. Footsteps sounded somewhere beyond the yard. Male voices. Armor. The boy went rigid, all warmth vanishing from his face. He scrambled behind Emma before she could stand, burying his hands in the back of her dress. She looked toward the shed door, where torchlight began to cut through the snow. Only then did she understand with a cold certainty that settled deep in her bones. This was not a lost servant child. This was the one every belle in the palace had been crying for. Emma did not run when the torchlight reached the doorway, but every part of her wanted to. Leo stood behind her, small hands tangled in the back of her work dress, breathing too fast as three palace guards appeared beyond the open shed door. Their lanterns swept across the hay, the cracked bench, the strip of cloth around the boy's ankle, and finally landed on Emma kneeling between the missing heir and the winter night. For one frozen second, no one moved. Then one guard lifted his hand to call the others, and Leo made a sharp, frightened sound. Emma turned immediately, blocking the light with her body. Too bright, she said quickly. Lower the lanterns. You are scaring him. The nearest guard stared at her, as if the laundry girl had spoken in a foreign language. That is the Alpha King's son. I know that now, Emma whispered, keeping her eyes on Leo. And he is still a child. The words fell quietly, but they changed the air. The guards hesitated, uncertain whether to obey a servant or the fear in the prince's golden eyes. Emma used that pause. She eased her shawl from her shoulders and draped it around Leo, wrapping him in faded wool that smelled faintly of soap, flour, and the lavender sachet she kept under her pillow. "You are safe right here," she murmured. "No one has to grab you. No one has to shout." Leo watched her mouth as if he were listening with more than his ears. His trembling slowed, not completely, but enough for the guards to notice. Emma reached into her apron pocket and found the last piece of roll he had pushed back to her. She broke it smaller and placed it on her palm. "You can finish it," she said. "I am not very hungry." That was not true. Her stomach had been empty since noon, but Leo accepted the bread with such solemn suspicion that she nearly smiled. The smallest corner of his mouth softened as he ate. Outside, more voices gathered near the laundry yard. Heavy boots crossed the frozen ground. Orders moved through the dark, low and urgent. Leo stiffened again, his gaze darting past Emma toward the palace. She followed his eyes to the fogged window beside the shed door. With one shaking finger, he reached up and drew a shape in the cloudy glass. A circle, a line through it, 3 small marks beneath. Emma frowned. It looked like a symbol, not a child's scribble. She had seen it before, but her tired mind could not place where. "What is that?" she asked softly. Leo pressed his lips together. His eyes filled with panic, and he wiped the mark away before the guards could see it. The motion sent a cold thread down Emma's spine. Whatever had happened to him was not simply a lost child wandering from his room. Someone had frightened him into silence. Someone inside these walls. She leaned closer, careful not to crowd him. "You do not have to tell me yet," she said. "But I believe you." Leo looked up at her then, truly looked, as if those 4 words had opened a door no key in the royal wing ever had. He lifted his hand, hesitated, and placed his small palm against the sleeve of her dress. A faint warmth passed through the thin fabric, silver and strange, like moonlight touching skin. Emma inhaled sharply. From somewhere outside, a commander called for the heir to be brought out at once. Leo's fingers clamped around her sleeve. The guard stepped forward. Emma rose slowly, keeping Leo behind her, and the shawl slipped just enough to reveal the boy's face. Every voice in the yard stopped. The missing heir had been found, but he was not reaching for the royal guards, the healers, or the palace doors. He was holding on to Emma Whittaker as if the lowest servant in Blackthorn Palace was the only safe thing left in the world. The moment Emma stepped out of the carriage shed with Leo pressed behind her, the laundry yard turned into a circle of torches, frost, and watching eyes. Snow drifted between the palace walls like pale ash, settling on the shoulders of warriors who had searched the grounds for hours and now stared at a servant girl as if she had dragged the moon out of the sky. Commander Garrett Stone stood at the center of them, broad-shouldered beneath his black coat, his jaw tight, his right hand held low in warning. Beside him, Lord Marcus Hale arrived with 2 senior guards, silver-threaded gloves pulled neatly over his fingers, his expression calm in a way that made Emma feel colder than the weather ever could. Leo saw him and changed. The boy's breathing hitched, then stopped for one terrible second. His fingers twisted in Emma's dress, and he moved closer until his forehead pressed into the back of her hip. Emma felt the fear run through him like a current. It was not confusion. It was recognition. Marcus looked at the child, then at Emma, and his face sharpened. "Separate them," he ordered. "The servant has had enough time to influence him." Emma's mouth went dry. "My lord, he is frightened." "He is royal blood," Marcus said. "You will not speak for him." 2 warriors stepped forward. Leo made a small sound, thin and panicked, and Emma raised both hands slowly, showing she carried nothing, not even the strip of wire she had removed from his ankle. "Please move carefully," she said. "He reacts to loud voices. He needs warmth, quiet, and a healer who does not crowd him." A few of the younger guards glanced at each other. Marcus did not. His gaze dropped to the cloth around Leo's ankle. "How convenient that you found him injured and alone." The accusation slid through the yard, quiet enough to sound reasonable and sharp enough to cut. Emma understood then how quickly a life like hers could be rewritten by someone powerful. Laundry servant became suspect. Kindness became trickery. A torn apron became evidence. She could feel every noble window above the courtyard filling with faces, every servant watching from shadows, every silent judgment settling onto her back. Garrett stepped closer, careful but firm. "Miss Whittaker, release the child." Leo darted around her before anyone could touch him, then immediately spun back and hid behind her again when Marcus shifted his weight. The motion was so clear, so unmistakable, that even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Garrett noticed. His eyes moved from Leo to Marcus. Emma noticed that too. For the first time, doubt flickered across the commander's face. Then the air changed. It thickened with pine, winter smoke, and something ancient enough to make every wolf in the yard lower their eyes. The torches bent as if a storm had entered without wind. Alpha King Adrian Blackthorn walked through the palace archway in a long black coat, his dark hair dusted with snow, his golden eyes fixed on the child behind Emma. No one spoke. No one dared. Emma had seen kings in portraits, carved into marble or painted above throne rooms, but this man was not a portrait. He was pressure. He was silence with a heartbeat. Leo peeked around Emma's skirt, and for one fragile moment, the fear in his face cracked into longing. Adrian saw it. He also saw the way his son did not run to him. The king stopped 10 feet away. His gaze lifted to Emma, then moved past her to Marcus, then back to Leo's hands clenched in a servant's dress. "Leo," he said, his voice low, almost gentle, but carrying through the entire yard. The boy trembled. Emma lowered herself slightly, so he could see his father without feeling exposed. "You are safe," she whispered. Leo did not step forward. Marcus cleared his throat. "Your Majesty, the servant must be detained until we know what she did to him." Adrian did not look at Marcus immediately. That made the silence worse. When he finally turned his head, the cold in his eyes made several warriors go still. "What she did to him," he repeated. Marcus bowed. "He is distressed in her presence." Leo tightened his grip on Emma and released a soft, frightened whimper only when Marcus spoke. Adrian heard it. Everyone heard it. The king's expression did not change, but the courtyard seemed to darken around him. He looked at his commander, his councilmen, the guards, and finally at the small servant girl standing between them and his son. "Then answer me carefully," Adrian said. "Why is my child calmer behind her than he is in front of the men sworn to protect him?" No one answered the king. The courtyard remained locked beneath his question until Adrian lifted one hand, and the warriors parted like a gate opening before winter itself. "Bring them to the royal wing," he said. "Both of them." Marcus bowed too quickly. Garrett looked relieved. Emma only felt Leo's fingers dig deeper into her dress as the palace swallowed them in marble, firelight, and a silence too polished to be kind. She had walked these halls before with baskets of linens pressed to her hip, always keeping to the side passages, always unseen. Now every painted ancestor, every guard, every whispering noble seemed to turn toward her as if the lowest servant in the house had stepped into a place meant for crowns. Leo stayed so close that his shoulder brushed her knee with each step. His bare feet left faint damp marks on the floor until Emma noticed and stopped. A dozen people stopped with her. She removed her own worn house slippers, thin as paper and hardly warmer than socks, and knelt to place them on his feet. The corridor went very still. "He is cold," she said, because that was the only explanation she had. Lady Vanessa Crowe appeared at the top of the grand staircase in a cream dress trimmed with white fur, her pale face arranged into concern so perfect it looked rehearsed. "Your Majesty," she said softly, "surely we are not allowing a kitchen servant to handle the air inside the royal wing." Emma lowered her eyes, but Leo pressed against her side, and that small movement seemed louder than any insult. Adrian watched it happen. "She is the only person he has allowed near him," he said. Vanessa's smile tightened. Children cling to strange things when frightened. Marcus stepped in smoothly. "That is why she should be questioned away from him. Influence can look like comfort when applied to a vulnerable mind." Emma felt the words settle around her like a net. She wanted to explain that she had done nothing except loosen wire, share bread, and speak softly in a cold shed. But people like Marcus did not ask questions to learn the truth. They asked them to decide where the blame would land. In the royal healing room, golden lamps burned against high stone walls, and 3 healers waited with trays of warm cloth, tonics, and shining instruments. The moment one approached Leo, the boy recoiled, climbing halfway behind Emma's skirt. The healer froze. Adrian stood near the door, his face unreadable, but his hand flexed once at his side. "Leo," he said quietly, "let them look at your ankle." Leo shook his head. Emma crouched to his level. careful to keep her hands visible. They need to make sure it does not hurt later, she said. You do not have to be brave all at once. Just one breath at a time. The boy stared at her. Then, very slowly, he held out his foot. The oldest healer inhaled in surprise. Vanessa looked away as if the sight offended her. Marcus watched too closely. As the healer unwound Emma's cloth, a faint silver mark shimmered across Leo's skin, then vanished so quickly Emma wondered if the cold had tricked her eyes. Leo saw it too. His hand shot out and grabbed her sleeve. Stay, he whispered. It was the first word anyone in the room had heard from him that night. The sound broke something open. A healer covered her mouth. Garrett looked at the floor. Adrian took one step forward, and for the first time since he had entered the courtyard, the king looked less like a ruler carved from stone and more like a father afraid to move too fast. Leo, he breathed. But the boy only leaned into Emma, exhausted beyond fear. She did not ask permission. She guided him onto the edge of the long velvet couch, wrapped a warmed blanket around his shoulders, and smoothed his tangled hair with the same gentle rhythm she used to fold linens. His eyes fluttered. Within minutes, the child who had kept an entire palace in terror was asleep with his cheek resting against Emma's hand. No one spoke. The room listened to his breathing as if it were a royal decree. Adrian looked from his sleeping son to the servant girl kneeling beside him. Everyone out, he said. Vanessa stiffened. Marcus opened his mouth, but the king's gaze cut to him with quiet finality. Now, one by one, the room emptied, leaving only the Alpha King, his sleeping heir, and Emma Whitaker, who suddenly understood that kindness had carried her much farther into danger than fear ever could. The royal healing room stayed quiet for exactly 7 minutes, and then Leo began to burn. At first, Emma thought the child was only dreaming. His fingers tightened around hers, his lashes fluttered, and a faint whimper slipped from his throat like a sound trapped behind glass. Then heat rolled from his small body, so suddenly that the warmed blanket around him seemed useless. Adrian crossed the room in one silent stride, all the cold command in his face cracking, into something sharper and more helpless. Leo, he said, touching 2 fingers to his son's forehead. The king went still. Call the healers back. The door opened before the order finished, as if half the palace had been listening from the hall. The healers returned with tonics, bowls of steaming water, and controlled voices that tried to sound certain. Emma stepped back because she was a servant and servants knew when to disappear, but Leo's hand locked around her sleeve with desperate strength. The oldest healer glanced at Adrian, uncertain. Your Majesty, the boy's wolf blood is reacting to something in his system. It could be shock. It could be silver exposure. We need space. Marcus appeared behind them, his silver-threaded gloves folded neatly at his waist. Then remove the girl. Her scent is confusing him. The moment he spoke, Leo's breathing broke into panicked little gasps. The lamps trembled. Somewhere beyond the window, a wolf howled once, low and uneasy. Emma looked at Marcus, then at Leo, and remembered the symbol the child had drawn on the fogged glass. A circle, a line, 3 marks beneath. The same pattern glimmered faintly on the clasp of Marcus's glove before he turned his hand away. Cold settled under Emma's ribs. Adrian noticed her stare. He noticed everything. What did you see? He asked. Emma opened her mouth, but Leo gave a fragile cry, and the room moved around him at once. The healers tried to guide a cup to his lips. He turned away. A second tonic was brought from a locked cabinet by one of Marcus's men, its dark glass catching the firelight. Emma did not know medicine, not royal medicine, but she knew fear. She knew when a child pulled away from the thing adults insisted would help. Wait, she said. No one listened. The healer lifted the vial. Leo thrashed weakly, not with anger, but terror, and the faint silver mark on his ankle flashed like moonlight under ice. Emma stepped forward before thought could stop her. Please wait. Marcus snapped. You forget your place. Emma did not look at him. Her whole world had narrowed to Leo's eyes, wide and pleading above the rim of the blanket. She heard herself humming before she chose the song. It was old, older than memory, the lullaby her mother used to sing when winter winds rattled the windows and hunger made sleep feel impossible. The first notes were barely louder than breath. The second line steadied. By the third, every flame in the room bent toward her. Leo stopped fighting. His chest rose once, unevenly, then again with the rhythm of the song. The healers froze. Adrian did not move at all. Outside, beyond the thick glass and falling snow, the uneasy howls faded into silence. One by one, the royal wolves gathered in the courtyard below and laid down in the snow as if the melody had reached through stone, command, and blood. Emma kept singing, terrified to stop. A soft silver glow spread from Leo's hand where it held her sleeve, climbing across her wrist like frost touched by dawn. The child's fever eased beneath her voice. His breathing deepened. His face, twisted moments before by pain and fear, softened into exhausted peace. In the silence after the final note, Leo opened his eyes and whispered, "Emma." Adrian inhaled as if the sound had struck him in the heart. His golden eyes lifted to hers, no longer cold, no longer certain. And somewhere inside him, something ancient answered with one word he could not ignore. Ours. The word that moved through Adrian's mind did not feel like a thought. It felt like a vow older than the palace stones. Ours. Emma did not hear it, but she felt the room change around her. The healers stared at her wrist where the silver glow had already faded, their faces caught between wonder and fear. Leo had fallen back into a quiet sleep, one hand still wrapped around her sleeve, his breathing soft, and even for the first time since he had been found. For one fragile moment, peace held. Then Marcus broke it. "Forbidden influence," he said, and his voice was calm enough to frighten her more than shouting would have. "Your Majesty, every person in this room witnessed it." The servant used an unregistered Luna song on the royal heir. Vanessa drew a careful breath from near the doorway, one gloved hand resting against her pearl necklace. "A servant with hidden power inside the royal wing," she murmured. "And the heir now speaks only her name. That is not comfort. That is danger dressed as innocence." Emma looked from face to face, realizing how quickly a miracle could be renamed a crime when it came from someone with no title. "I was only trying to help him," she said. Her voice sounded small in the vast room, but it did not shake. Marcus turned toward the healers. "Record what happened." The girl sang without authorization, altered the heir's condition, and resisted removal. Adrian's gaze cut to him. "She saved my son from a crisis your healers could not stop, or caused the crisis so she could appear useful," Marcus replied smoothly. The room went so still that even the fire seemed to hold its breath. Emma felt Leo stir against her hand. Adrian stepped forward, but Marcus bowed before the king could speak, perfect and polished. "I serve only the throne. If I am wrong, I will accept judgment. But if I am right, and we allow an unknown servant to bind herself to the heir, the northern packs will call this weakness. They will say the Blackthorn line can be swayed by kitchen songs and pretty tears." Vanessa lowered her eyes with practiced sorrow. A public review would protect everyone. Emma understood then. This was not about Leo's safety. This was about pulling her away from him before he remembered too much. She looked at Marcus's gloves again, at the clasp half hidden beneath his sleeve. The circle, the line, 3 marks beneath. The symbol Leo had wiped from the fogged glass. Her stomach turned cold. "He drew your mark," she whispered. Marcus's expression did not change, but something passed through his eyes, quick as a shadow beneath ice. "Careful, girl." Adrian heard the warning inside those 2 words. So did Garrett, standing near the door with his jaw tight. Before anyone could move, Leo opened his eyes. His gaze found Marcus, and all the calm Emma had given him trembled at the edges. He did not scream. He did not point. He only whispered, "No." That single word struck harder than any accusation. Marcus recovered instantly. "The child is confused. He has been under her influence for hours." He turned to the guards. "Escort Miss Whitaker to the lower council chamber. Until the hearing." Leo's hand tightened in her sleeve. Emma bent close to him, smoothing his hair as gently as she could. "Do not be afraid of the truth, little wolf," she whispered. "Even if your voice is small, it still matters." 2 guards approached, hesitant under Adrian's stare. Emma rose before they could touch her, because she would not let Leo see her dragged from the room like something shameful. She met Adrian's eyes once. In them she saw fury held behind royal control, and beneath it, a question he had not yet dared ask aloud. "Who are you?" The corridor outside the healing room was lined with silent servants, pale-faced nobles, and wolves in human skin listening for the sound of their prince. As Emma was led away, the royal wolves in the snowy courtyard below rose one by one. No one commanded them. No horn called them. Still, they turned toward the council wing and began to walk, quiet and united, as if the palace itself had decided the hearing would not belong to Marcus alone. The lower council chamber had been built to make small people feel smaller. Its ceiling rose 3 stories above Emma's head, all black beams and carved wolves, while rows of nobles watched from curved balconies trimmed in silver. Emma stood alone at the center of the marble floor in her faded servant dress, her hands clasped together so no one would see them tremble. Marcus presented his case with perfect calm. He spoke of hidden influence, forbidden songs, and the danger of allowing an unknown servant near royal blood. Vanessa sat among the Luna candidates, her white-gloved hands folded in her lap, her expression soft with false pity. "No one doubts the girl's intentions may appear gentle," she said, her voice carrying sweetly through the chamber. "But gentleness can still be used to control." A murmur moved through the court. Emma kept her eyes lowered until the great doors opened. Adrian entered carrying Leo wrapped in a dark blanket, and the chamber fell silent so quickly it felt as if every candle had stopped breathing. The child looked pale but awake, his golden eyes searching the room with fragile urgency. Marcus bowed. "Your Majesty, for the safety of the heir, I request that the servant be removed before his testimony." Leo stiffened in Adrian's arms. Emma saw it. Adrian saw it. The king lowered his son gently to the floor. "No," he said. "Let him choose where he stands." The chamber held its breath. Leo looked at the guards, at the council, at Marcus, and then at Emma. His little feet crossed the marble slowly at first, then faster, until he reached her and hid behind the skirt of her servant dress exactly as he had in the laundry yard. The court erupted in whispers. Emma turned, kneeling at once so she would not tower over him. "You are safe," she whispered. Leo shook his head and pointed one small finger across the chamber. Not at Emma. At Marcus. "He said not to tell," Leo whispered. The words were quiet, but they carried because the room wanted them to disappear and could not make them. Marcus went pale beneath his polished composure. "The child is confused." Leo shook his head harder. He had the mark. Adrian's gaze moved to Marcus's glove. "Remove it." Marcus hesitated. That hesitation convicted him before the glove ever came off. Garrett stepped forward and unclasped it, revealing the same circle, line, and 3 marks engraved into the silver at Marcus's wrist. A sound passed through the chamber, part shock, part recognition. Emma felt Leo's fear surge and gathered him gently against her shoulder. The silver light at her wrist returned, soft and clear, spreading not like fire, but like moonlight over snow. Beyond the tall windows, the royal wolves filled the courtyard, hundreds of pale eyes lifted toward the chamber. One by one, they lowered themselves to the ground. Not to Marcus, not to the council, to Emma. Vanessa stood too quickly, her chair scraping the floor. "This is impossible." Adrian descended the dais, each step measured, his face unreadable until he reached Emma and Leo. He removed his black royal cloak and placed it around Emma's shoulders, covering the thin servant dress and the marks of a long winter spent being unseen. Then the Alpha King turned to the court. "This servant found my son when power failed him. She comforted him when command frightened him. She gave him truth when this council offered suspicion." His golden eyes darkened as they settled on Marcus. "And the wolves have chosen their witness." Leo lifted his face from Emma's shoulder, his voice small but clear. "Emma saved me." The chamber did not move. Then every wolf outside bowed lower, and the sound of their quiet devotion rolled through the glass like thunder made gentle. Emma looked down at the child in her arms, then up at the king standing beside her, and understood with a trembling breath that the life she had entered as a servant was ending in front of everyone who had ever refused to see her. Emma woke to the sound of snow tapping softly against glass and a small hand holding hers as if letting go might make the world disappear again. For a breath, she did not know where she was. The ceiling above her was painted with silver constellations, the fire beside the bed burned with steady golden light, and the blanket over her shoulders was softer than anything that had ever belonged to a servant girl from the laundry wing. Then Leo stirred beside her, curled in a chair pulled close to the bed, his dark lashes resting against cheeks no longer pale with fever. Adrian stood near the window with his back to the room, still as a shadow carved from winter, watching the royal wolves keep silent guard in the courtyard below. When Emma moved, Leo woke instantly. "Do not leave," he whispered, his voice small with sleep. Emma's heart tightened. She brushed the hair from his forehead with trembling fingers. "I am right here." The words were simple, but Leo believed them, and that trust felt more precious than every jewel in the palace. Adrian turned then. Without the court watching, without the council pressing in, he looked less like an untouchable king and more like a father who had almost lost the only heartbeat he could not command back by force. "Marcus has confessed enough for the council to remove him," he said quietly. Garrett found records, false patrol orders, and a list of guards paid to look the wrong way. Vanessa has been stripped of her place among the Luna candidates until the investigation is complete. Emma lowered her eyes. Justice should have felt like triumph, but all she felt was tired. "I am glad Leo is safe." Adrian crossed the room slowly, as if he understood that power had frightened his son for too long and gentleness had to arrive without thunder. "You ask for nothing," he said. Emma looked at the blanket in her lap, at the silver glow resting faintly beneath her skin like moonlight that had not fully faded. "I was raised not to ask." The truth slipped out before she could soften it. Adrian's jaw tightened, not at her, but at the world that had taught her such a lesson. "Then I will not take your choice from you now." Emma looked up. He stood at a respectful distance, his black royal cloak folded over one arm, no command in his posture, no expectation in his eyes. "You may leave the palace with protection and enough money to build a life anywhere in the country. You may stay as Leo's guardian if that is what you want. Or you may stay under my protection while we learn what your gift means. No title will be forced on you. No bond will be demanded from you. You have already given more than anyone had the right to ask." For the first time since the laundry yard, Emma felt her fear loosen. Leo climbed carefully onto the bed and leaned against her side. "Stay," he whispered again, but this time it was not panic. It was hope. Emma looked at him, then at the king, then at the window where the courtyard shone white beneath the morning sky. The royal wolves were still there, forming a quiet circle in the snow. When Emma stepped onto the balcony later that morning, wrapped in Adrian's cloak over her plain servant dress, every face in the courtyard lifted. Servants stood beside nobles. Warriors stood beside healers. No one laughed. No one looked through her. Leo held one of her hands. Adrian walked beside the other, and the wolves lowered their heads as the first sunlight spilled over the mountains. Emma had entered Blackthorn Palace as a girl trained to be unseen. She had scrubbed its floors, warmed its linens, and swallowed its insults in silence.